I think 95% of Aussie companies are SMB. You've then got a kind of big oligopoly of enterprise whales who are dominating mining, financial services, government healthcare, obviously.
Do you remember how many enterprise businesses there are in Australia?
5,000 to 6,000. 60% of the revenue that was coming into the SaaS market was coming from those enterprises. Fewer businesses versus SMB, but they are actually paying their fair share when it comes to actually winning one or two of them. Let's try and pour a bit of gas on the fire here.
I think it's really valid because, Alex, super grateful that you joined. You've just written an incredible paper for us, which is really aimed at SaaS companies that are thinking of coming into Australia. I also think that a lot of the content is incredibly relevant for Australian SaaS startup scale-up businesses because the amount of intel that you've got around the types of customers, the volume of customers in this market, I think can really help to define go-to-market. But before we crack into that, I'd love to get to a quick introduction from yourself in terms of who you are, your background, and
Sure.
What excited you about kind of working with us initially?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty new to Australia. I started my career mainly in London. Had a lot of kind of initially early stage startups, doing a lot of kind of first go-to-market sales rep partnerships person on the ground, and kind of eventually went further and further up market. So did a bunch of work with companies like the Financial Times, a couple of SoftBank portcos, and most recently my last perm role was with Paddle, where I was leading a lot of the new product launches, new market launches. Decided to have a bit of a lifestyle change, moved over to Australia, finally kind of did what I said I was going to do when I was 21. And interestingly, I fell into a lot of kind of consulting work. I think because I've experienced a lot of markets, traditionally US, UK, Europe, Israel even, managed to, I think, build up a bit of a playbook of how to actually properly assess a market, launch into it, win your first customers. And so fell into projects with a lot of folks who are looking to move into Australia for the first time. I think we met via David Corbin, was it? Joseph in the Commons on George Street. And I think we kind of got chatting. You said you were looking to kind of put more insight out there, and I think it was probably aligning with the times where I was really deep into a lot of research of helping folks come into Australia. And yeah, it was a pretty interesting, eye-opening research to kind of put my academic hat on, speak to a lot of operators and try and get some of their insights and hopefully get a decent product which adds a bit of value to folks who are thinking about it or wanting to get a better understanding of I guess, their home market.
Well, we had 250 organic downloads within the first couple of weeks. So I think that speaks to the volume of the interest in it. And the feedback was generally really positive. And I learned something, and I rely on some of the data when I'm having conversations as well. So really, really happy with how it came out. But I wanted to take an opportunity to share some of the findings on this show for SaaS leaders, operators, whether you're in Australia, whether you're international, thinking about this market. And when I say this market, APAC is, we're here in Australia, but APAC is a much broader market. Singapore is often the other side of the coin in terms of, do I go to Singapore or Australia? So diving straight in, you spent quite a lot of time researching, interviewing. What would you say the top, the highlights of the paper were in terms of looking like that would be relevant for SaaS companies coming to Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, starting at the data that I dived right into head first, I was really surprised to, I think, what we termed the barbell effect of the market. The fact that you've got, I think, 95% of Aussie companies, I think 98% in some studies I saw, are SMB. You've then got a kind of big oligopoly of enterprise whales who are dominating mining, financial services, government healthcare, obviously.
When you say big, are you talking about volume or value of business?
Number of headcount, seats, size of business, typically revenue, depending on how you're kind of weighing it. By size, by enterprise, I kind of meant more headcount, could be revenue. So the kind of big behemoths, the Combanks of the world, government organizations, the kind of big whales where if you win one of those logos, you're kind of set in the market. I think what was pretty interesting when we then looked at the mid-market, there was a pretty small number of companies, which is kind of surprising when you think about Australia having a bunch of success stories, especially in, the SaaS and tech space. Everyone's heard of Canva, Atlassian, Airwallex, and you kind of think there's an awful lot of folks who are probably sitting within the space and segment just below that. But there's a big dearth. I think we kind of got out there and started asking folks, like, why is there this gap? I think there's probably two interesting reasons. I think one of it is structural. A lot of VCs in Australia aren't writing big enough checks to take those kind of growth seed stage Series A businesses and propel them into Series B, Series C, which would kind of warrant a mid-market stamp. I think another interesting thing could be a bit of culture. You've got an awful lot of folks who are potentially looking for more lifestyle business. They're potentially getting bought out before they ever even get into that stage, whether it's domestically or overseas. So yeah, I think a pretty interesting consideration that folks need to make when they're considering Australia is, if we're selling heavily into mid-market, that's our sweet spot. Is Australia the right market for it?
And just to clarify, what are you calling mid-market?
Mid-market, I think we defined as anything from 200 employees up to 1,000.
Okay.
Some companies obviously start considering like revenue and things like that, but that's kind of our main approach.
Yeah, interesting. I've thought about this a lot as well, and my perspective coming from a different angle on this topic as well is a couple of things. One is Australia is a relatively new country. So we were founded in, I think, 1788, around then from memory. It's also an enormous mass. So it's the same size as North America with less than a tenth of the population, and everyone lives on the seaborder. So everyone lives all the way around the country. Yeah, what that means from a business perspective is there's going to be lots of small pockets dotted all around the country of small businesses, and it's actually there isn't the population in a particular city to warrant necessarily having a full mid-market sales team or mid-market organization all the time as well. So I think there's something there as well. It doesn't have the legacy like the traditional countries like America or some European ones that have, like you said, been going for many years and generations. So there's something in it, but to your point, the clear piece of observation is there aren't that many companies in that sector. So if you're looking to bet big on Australian mid-market, then you either need to focus elsewhere or to find a different ideal customer profile to go after.
For sure.
So, yeah, awesome. I mean, with regards to sales motion, there's multiple different approaches for launching into a new region. With your experience, what do you see some common ones in other regions, and what do you believe is the most appropriate one for someone considering this region?
Definitely no one fits all approach. I think we had a multitude of different motions from a ton of different operators that we spoke to. Angus at Monday.com, who's obviously a sort of partnerships leader, had some really interesting things to say about if you're going for a kind of partner-led motion, it's a great way to dip your toe in the water, get that presence without necessarily having to really invest in team operations, even office space. Get one or two really strong partners who can propel your brand. You can kind of piggyback off the social proof that company, whether it's AWS or Google or maybe even someone smaller who kind of have a very big footprint in a very niche community. Or potentially, we're seeing an awful lot of folks who are taking the conventional sales-led approach, right? Potentially they're being pulled into market, i.e. they've got one or two customers who have come inbound to their sales team in London or San Francisco or wherever it will be, have obviously assessed the product and said, yeah, we don't care that you guys don't have any support staff in Australia. We have a real need for your solution for the particular problem that we've got. I think that's what we see a lot of the kind of smaller, earlier stage companies coming into Australia from, by seeing signals in the market and saying, guys, there's a bit of a trend here. Like 1 or 2 maybe is a bit of an anomaly, but if we've got 5 inbounds from Sydney and Melbourne, maybe we've got a product market fit here without much effort, and let's try and pour a bit of gas on the fire here. I think alternatively, we spoke to the likes of Matt Loop, who's now leading efforts at Rippling and has been at Slack previously. I think they had a much more strategic approach where they thought APAC's next on our list. The board's asking for it. There's a huge market of billions of people over there. We need to find a way of validating that market works. And I think what was a real common thread when we spoke to a bunch of people, right, was Australia, if you're coming from, San Francisco or New York or London or Tel Aviv even in some cases, is culturally way easier to come and land and test out that market versus, jumping into Hong Kong or Tokyo or in some circumstances even Singapore. And yeah, to kind of loop back to the approach that they're using for that, obviously, classic 2 or 3 account execs, couple of SDRs, maybe even a country manager who are saying, look, let's try and spend 3 years making a good go at this. I think we heard from both Matt Loop and Chris Sharp of Pax8, who was saying, a year to set things up, a year to make money, and a year to actually step it up a level. And so I think folks who are, yes, being experimental, trying to prove a hypothesis of does this sales motion or does this product-led motion or partner-led motion work, but investing in the market and realizing they need to spend 1, 2, 3 years to actually give a good go of it, rather than saying, it didn't work after 6 months, let's go back.
Yeah, I know particularly in the ASEAN countries, they are really put off if you launch a business into region and then a year later you pull out. And so many North American vendors have got a habit of doing that. They don't see the revenue and they pull out. It's really hard to make a second first impression.
Yeah.
If you've done that once. I want to touch on the piece you mentioned about the similarities in culture and business and the English language as well, and kind of pull that towards localization. And that was something that Matt talked about, Chris talked about it as well. And I think it's really valid, because when you're looking at international expansion, talking to the market in their terms requires a level of nuance and finesse. But if you've got the same language, in your code of the software as an example, or from a reporting compliance perspective, it's going to be a lot easier to launch. What did you discover around, where does it make sense to localize versus maybe hold off in a software product as you go internationally?
Yeah, good question. I think first and foremost, if you've got a product which someone like Rippling has, where there is a regulatory involvement, or they need to localize payroll, because that is how the Aussie government or the state, I don't know anything about payroll, so I'm probably misspeaking here, sorry Matt, but there's needs there around localizing, because it is absolute table stakes for a product to even operate legally within a market. Obviously that is always going to be the first requirement. I think who's the chap from one of the chaps that you brought in who was from Andrew Thiss?
Yeah, from Sonder.
Yes, Andrew Thiss at Sonder. He was saying that data sovereignty was actually big for them, and it can cost you an ad like 6 months potentially to an enterprise deal cycle if you've not got that in place before you start those sales conversations. Everything's kind of ready to go. They love the product. They've maybe even trialed it in a sandbox environment. It's great. And then it gets to the compliance team or procurement team and, you haven't ticked the box of data sovereignty. So yeah, that's obviously a kind of a key localization thing that I think isn't particularly sexy, but maybe is a big kind of thing to consider. I remember Matt saying something really interesting about how the localization of team was actually very important. I think when they first started, they had a product manager who was working out of New York, who Matt said, super talented. The reason why he was chosen for this project was because he was one of the top PMs there. But because he wasn't in market speaking to customers day in, day out, and also probably had that lack of local knowledge about, I'm sure, what isn't maybe the most entertaining of topics of Aussie payroll compliance. Some of the things which possibly should have been done super early on in their launch into Australia actually didn't happen until 12 months, 18 months later, which again cost them progress and probably wiped a bit of their TAM as a result of that.
And when you have a conversation on APAC, a lot of when we talk about international firms, they think APAC, they think massive populations, one of the biggest populations on Earth. But the reality is that APAC is not a single region; it's multiple regions, and we've got within the ASEAN region, you've got Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia. Each one of them it got its own local currency, it's got its own local language, it's got its own local nuances, compliance, regulations, etc. The amount of work that is required to successfully go in and execute in one of those markets, just one alone, is substantial. So my counsel when speaking to these companies is like, think about where your lowest hanging fruit is from an APAC perspective. And the reality is an English speaking country that's culturally aligned to North America, Europe, English speaking, and an economy that is strong. That has got a culture of giving it a go as well, means that Australia often is the right landing spot. There are times where it makes more sense to go to Singapore, though.
Yeah.
And what would you say if you were to compartmentalize? I would sway you to Singapore or Australia. What are those filters that you would put in place and say, actually, I think this is probably the time where you should explore Singapore?
Yeah, really good question. Singapore's super interesting, I think, because on the surface level, you can see all of the big global companies who have got offices there. And you think, great, let's go and target Singapore because we win a couple of these logos. We've just won Apple or Google or whatever the company is, but actually there's only 20 people in the office. So if you're selling by seats and the US or the European offices aren't interested in your product, then it's not actually an enterprise scalp. It's an enterprise logo, but not actually an enterprise paycheck, right? I think Singapore is definitely strong in certain segments. You're seeing a lot of the AI native companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, 11 Labs, who are kind of planting their flag in Singapore first, which is counter to how some of the more conventional SaaS companies of Salesforce, Slack have done things in the past. I'd probably owe that more to the regulatory landscape that they have in Singapore. They've done a lot of work to make the regulatory side of an AI company landing in Singapore very easy for them. Australia hasn't really committed to any sort of policy on this just yet. I wonder whether or not the fact that we're in an election year in Australia at the moment, folks are thinking, well, there's no point in setting up an office and then Albanese or Dutton turning around to us and saying, hey, actually, we are going to put these rules in place, right? So maybe that's part of it. I think where Singapore is probably quite strong is where you are fully aware that you need to rapidly expand into multiple markets like Vietnam, like Thailand. If that is the case, let's say you've got a very homogenous product which doesn't need tons of localization. Possibly it's even a product-led growth motion whereby you just need local support, operations, marketing folks who can base themselves out of Singapore, but not necessarily sales and solutions teams who are going to have to speak Vietnamese or Thai on a kind of deal by deal basis. I think that then makes a bit more sense. I think if you do have a kind of classic sales-led motion, you're wanting to get good learnings from one market before potentially moving into the next market and the next market after that. Australia does kind of make a bit more sense.
And that's all really interesting and all really valid. And something else I've layered on top of that as well is the sell. Is it an enterprise sell or is it an SME sell? And there's a lot more large enterprises in Asia than there are in this region, and the economics of a deal may make sense to invest in localization in a couple of countries to grab that land or that market share.
Completely. What I'd probably add as well is, if you're trying to do an SMB play in Indonesia, let's say, or Malaysia, the digital footprint typically of some of these SMBs in these kind of less economically developed countries is probably lower than if you are trying to sell to, let's say, Australian nail tech salons as an example. A lot of them will have their own kind of digital footprint, or let's say an accountant is probably a better option in Australia. Very difficult for you to create a repeatable outbound motion trying to find your niche accountant who's one person and their son in a remote part of Indonesia versus someone in rural Australia, as an example. So yeah, I think it depends on who.
Do you remember how many enterprise businesses there are in Australia?
I think 5,000 to 6,000. But I think what was most interesting was, 60% of the revenue that was coming into the SaaS market was coming from those enterprises. So yes, naturally fewer businesses versus SMB, but they are actually paying their fair share when it comes to actually winning one or two of them.
Yeah. And when you've worked with and consulted and interviewed a lot of these operators, have you noticed a common thread around success? Like, if there was the top 1, 2, 3 things that must be in place in order for you to launch your business effectively in this region, did anything surface?
I think what we were talking about earlier, the commitment to market. Australia is a very relationship-driven market. I was super surprised coming from London into Australia, where I thought it was a very similar culture, but actually kind of far more collegiate, relationship-driven. Everyone seems to know everyone. I think someone said to me the other day, like, you can't really be an arsehole in working in tech in Australia, because if one person hears about it, everybody hears about it, and it's very easy to burn bridges and kind of ruin your chances of the market if kind of word spreads. And so I think folks who have done exceptionally well have really invested in getting out in market, demonstrating that they've got investment. Some folks are starting to take much more of a community-driven play. Like if you look at Notion, recently I've noticed that they've had a lot of energy in building a community brand, spending time in market, building relationships in the startup ecosystem, sponsoring events. And I think that actually is a really strong notification to the market that, we are here to stay. Yes, we were born in the US or born in Europe, but actually we've got your guys' backs and we've got your kind of thinking about what you guys wanted to do. And
I want to touch on founding teams.
Yeah.
You mentioned heavily reliant on relationships. There's different types of, from what I've seen, go-to-market motions. And you talked about some of this in the paper as well. What are some of those different approaches, and what is the right one for a different scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was definitely a common thread in terms of who's been most successful, the need for having a founding team in market who have experience in the market is definitely key. I think the best ones blend local expertise with probably some transplants from other offices who know the product, know the sales plays, and can also embed some of the culture from HQ or some of the larger offices into what is a small team, which I think is critically important, especially if you look at country managers typically get a gig, bring over their kind of star sales talent, and very quickly it's very easy for you to have a completely different company culture, especially given the fact that you're in some cases 10, 12 hours away in terms of time zone, and start maybe building a culture which isn't quite what HQ wants to have or is right for the company or the product. So I think having that blend of local operators and expertise, as well as even if it's 6 months or 12 months that folks are over here for, that is, I think, a really important thing in terms of general structure. I mean, you deal with that kind of day in, day out. What's your kind of take on that?
Where I think about it, they're going to be a sales-led approach where you have a player coach that comes in and he effectively will be a hands-on seller and get his hands dirty, and then he'll build a small team around him. And what I've seen successful, and I've done myself a number of times, is you've got a pod. You've got a couple of sales reps, you've got a pre-sales person, so a technical resource, you've got 1 or 2 SDRs and maybe a success person as well. Yeah. So that pod of 4 to 5 covers all bases. So that's one approach. The other one is where you hire in a regional business operator that is effectively going to build the entire structure, both front office and back office, locally as well. I'm an advocate for. It does depend on your investment, your capacity, and your I guess the stage of business that you're at, but getting the right team in place early on. And I think it's critically important that you've got that first hire as someone that, like you said, has got experience in the market, potentially some relationships as well, but is going to be hands-on. They've got to be selling. They've got to be the ones that are driving a lot of that initial momentum. So that's my experience, and what I've seen be successful, particularly at some of the earlier stages. Series B, C, D. Yeah. As opposed to some of the later stages that have potentially got some deeper pockets to invest the full team. Yeah.
And I think also investment from execs and founders coming over here, even if it's once a month, once a quarter, depending on how far away they are, obviously, is super important. I think not just for signaling to customers or prospects that actually, this is a big core market for the company. But also to give them a kind of first viewpoint on what are customers saying, what are the product requirements, because if you've got a large scale up and this is a bit of a venture bet to validate the Australian market, maybe the country lead's getting 1-2 hours a week max with some of these execs or co-founders. And so I think giving the opportunity for folks to actually truly learn what are customers saying, what are the needs, and what are the kind of quirks of the market will pay off the dividends, right?
Alex, I want to dive straight in. One of the key takeaways of the paper that you wrote about, which is got a lot of people talking about it, is this barbell effect. Tell me, what is the barbell effect and what does it mean for technology companies?
Yeah, it was super surprising. So the way we kind of look at the barbell effect, you've got, I guess, on the left weight plate, the SMB market. So 95, 97% of companies in Australia are SMB. On the kind of right side, you've got enterprise, where 1 or 2 key players per vertical. These big whales who are dominating, I think, 60% of revenue into SaaS businesses. And then surprisingly, in the middle, you've got a very kind of narrow, thin segment of mid-market companies.
And mid-market is what, 200 to 1,000?
200 to 1,000, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think not a massive market whereby you can have lots of mid-market companies, funding, these sorts of things, I think is the reason.
So cause and effect, how does that barbell story impact a technology SaaS business that is thinking about coming to Australia?
I think if folks are doing their due diligence, doing their homework and looking at the data, if you are in your home market selling into mid-market and that is a real scalable, repeatable process, there are probably better markets out there than Australia to go after. There's probably some outliers, Some people listening to this might be thinking, no, you're wrong, we're doing amazingly well. But 9 times out of 10, most folks are going to struggle if they go after a mid-market approach here. If you are selling into SMB or you're after 1 or 2 key government accounts or big banks, great, Australia is probably a good approach. And there's also a really interesting fact because although some of the accounts are very large in size, everybody knows each other. And so if you win 1 or 2, you can be propelled to kind of snowball effect.
Yeah, super interesting. Super interesting. All right, next question. You spent weeks going through this research, and I'm incredibly grateful because so many people have got so much value from it. And for those listening, the white paper is available to download for free as well. What were your key 2 to 3 takeaways that were an aha moment, a surprise, or just reaffirmed what you thought coming into the research project?
Yeah, I think firstly, Australia is very relationship driven.
Okay.
If you're trying to enter the market from a remote outbound SDR team out of London, it's going to be very difficult. You need to be in market. I think that leads pretty closely to you need to show folks that you are invested here. You're here for the long haul. Lots of operators that we spoke about the need to see this as a 3-year experiment. 1 year to set things up, 1 year to make money, 1 year to make things go to the next level. Folks can definitely spot when you are here just for 6 months as part of a kind of board level project. And 3, key thing is local expertise. Yes, bring people over from HQ, try and get that culture coming across to a new office and a new workforce, but you really need to heavily invest in getting folks in the team who have the contacts, know the nuances of the market, and probably have a lot of those relationships already. And you're going to really speed up your time to revenue and winning a larger part of the market. Even if you've got the best products in the world, relationships really do matter here. And I think that's a big bit of advice.
Yeah, completely agree. And we've seen that a lot with some of our international clients is they lean on us because we've got the relationships with the people that have got the relationships as well. And it is incredibly important. It takes the guesswork, it takes the risk out of it as well. So great points. Alex, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, incredibly valuable. And the white paper, again, is available for anyone that wishes to read more about this. Just in closing, one final question. If we're speaking to any international SaaS companies, whether they're in North America, Europe, Israel, that are thinking about APAC, what would be your final tip or counsel as they consider their launch into the APAC region?
Yeah, completely depends on company, obviously. But I think number 1, make sure that there's a big enough market to go after. Make sure you're doing the homework to understand what those customers actually need, probably different to your home market. 2, make sure there's exec buy-in. Lots of folks are seeing this as a hobby rather than as a full-time project to invest time into the market. And I think 3, get local expertise, people who've got the relationships and understand the quirks of the market.
Awesome. Great tips. Thank you again. And anyone's interested, reach out to Alex. And if they are interested in reaching you, how can they?
LinkedIn's normally best.
Okay.
Alex Awesome.
Yeah, perfect.